Hello and welcome back to Spill the Soup, the podcast that gives you insight into the life of today's teenage world. I'm your host, Marley Camito, and with all eyes around the world turned to our home city, Minneapolis, this week we'd like to bring our attention to the social justice and racial awakening that our country's experiencing. More specifically, how our voices as teenagers can help truly make a difference and how we as Jews can act as allies to all. Today I am joined once again by two wonderful guests, Sadie Yarosh and Zoe Bohrod. Welcome both of you to the show, and thank you so much for being here. If you both could introduce yourselves, please say your name, your age, and then just where you go to school.
I'm Sadie. I'm so excited to be back. I'm 18, and I go to St. Louis Park High School.
I'm Zoe. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm 17 and also go to St. Louis Park High School.
Before we start, like always, I just wanted to restate that we hope to keep today's conversation as open, authentic, and honest as possible. What is discussed in this episode has absolutely no intention to offend or transgress any person, group, or community. Sadie, Zoe, and I will be sharing 100% opinion-based information, and everything we talk about today is simply based on our own personal experiences this past year, not taken from any solidified facts or arguments. So, with that being said, we can get right into our episode. Before we discuss how the entire country has been affected by the recent horrific murders and exposure to police brutality due to racial injustices, I wanted us to first focus on our city of Minneapolis and think back to late last May, almost a year ago from now, which is totally crazy, just when the world was beginning to change. Following the unjustifiable murder of George Floyd, basically 3 miles away from each of our homes, I was wondering how you guys felt when the news broke that this event had happened. What really went through your mind? I mean, it's common sense that we were all enraged, but did you guys feel encouraged to walk through and engage in protests? Did you want to be in Minneapolis during the heat of the moment? Did you end up visiting George Floyd's memorial? Just kind of share about what last spring had looked like from your perspectives.
When I actually found out through social media because the video, someone had posted it and it was swarming all around. So I'm a pretty sensitive person, so to this day, I still haven't watched the full video. I couldn't get myself to watch it. It's so heartbreaking. I couldn't get myself to watch it. So that was really hard. But I mean, as a white female, I think I definitely have a different perspective than people from other communities of color. And so it definitely hit a hard spot in my heart, but I know that it's a lot closer to home to a lot of people of color in my community as well.
To me, I don't know, it all just felt really surreal. I feel like this is the kind of stuff you hear about happening in places like New York or Boston or Los Angeles or like any other big part of the country, not literally in like your backyard. And reflecting now, I feel like I was just living in this bubble my entire life. I didn't realize that Minnesota, I don't know, I thought it was always so diverse and loving of all people. I never imagined that so many Minnesotan people of color had felt so targeted for all these years. And I vulnerably will admit that just proves my privilege showing. But I guess, I don't know, I believed in the Minnesota Nice motto for so many years, and I never could have really predicted this happening. But one thing that I do remember is being so frustrated with the news, because my family would turn on TV and reporters across the entire country would just be calling Minneapolis some war zone, or that it's like the most dangerous and violent city all over. And that was only because of the burned buildings and the violence that was erupting across the city. But I don't know, my family and I did end up paying our respects, and we visited George Floyd's memorial just a few days or weeks after everything was going on. And it literally was like the most peaceful, beautiful place in the world. Like, I remember crying and hugging strangers, all with masks on, and it felt like one of the most eye-opening experiences and moments that I'd ever witnessed. So it made me realize that scene was what Minneapolis was really turning into, not a war zone, but a stronger community.
So yeah, I agree. The media did portray a lot of Minneapolis, but not the good parts, just kind of like, again, the war zone, the fires. But there was a really big sense of community after what happened. I mean, I remember people donated hundreds and hundreds of bags to churches and local schools, and it just really shows how the media is not all as what it seems, and that there is a lot going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, so for me, with like right after the news came out, like just so many emotions kind of filled up in my head, and um through like that rage and frustration, I also was like extremely motivated to get out and do something. um I went to some protests, visited the memorial, and like Marley said, that sense of community when I was there was something that I had never experienced before, and it was just amazing to see. It was extremely peaceful, and it was really a celebration of his life. Um, and yeah.
Yeah, and on that note of motivation to do something about it, that kind of leads into my next little topic, because one reason that I love you guys and wanted to speak on this with you is that after all the civil unrest happened, we all felt that same strong desire to help the community and physically do something to make people's lives a little bit easier around Minneapolis. So, to shed some background information, Sadie, Zoe, and two other friends of ours and I met up, and then we became determined to find a place in Minneapolis to volunteer to help those in need who were either struggling financially due to COVID-19, and then especially after so much had been going on inside their neighborhoods. So it was then we found the Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in South Minneapolis, shout out you guys, who was both accepting food donations and in need of physical volunteers to work on the church site, helping distribute the donations they were receiving to all the residents in need. So we volunteered for a few days, and we realized that so many products and home goods were still in high demand by these residents. So together, we organized a fund on Venmo to raise money to purchase more items and donate them all to the church. And we all go to Herzl Camp, and this was our Ozo summer. So our fund and our idea later became the Ozo Avodah project. So I kind of wanted you both to speak a little on what our volunteering experience meant to you, if it ignited more motivation to keep volunteering and contributing inside you, or how whatever you witnessed at the church really shifted your perspective, and anything kind of on that note.
I think going to the church and just raising the money and stuff, it did shift my perspective a lot. I got, again, after he was murdered, I also felt a sense of motivation to get out and do something. And so that is why I wanted to participate and help raise money and stuff and volunteer. And just seeing, it was so heartbreaking to see how long these lines were. We were there for 5 hours giving out food and water and feminine hygiene products just all day. And the lines were going all day and all night, whether that was from lack of financial stability or they didn't really have a grocery store or a close drugstore near them to go purchase these essential items. So again, it really did shift my perspective on how many people were actually in need and needed support from their community.
Yeah, so it was just a very eye-opening experience to see how this is like maybe 10 minutes away from my house, and yet it seemed like a completely different world. And it just felt really good to be able to do something, and makes me want to continue to do all that I can to help out.
Every time I drive through different parts of town, I always feel like it's almost like two Minneapolises, and that sounds so horrible when I say it out loud, but it's true, and it helps to witness those things to really recognize how much you have to be grateful for, and how so many people live differently than us. But looking at the bigger picture
Sure.
of how other teenagers, Jewish or non-Jewish, have reacted towards all the current events in our country, I wanted to transition a little bit over to the impact of social media, as our generation is really the footprint of living in this technological media influenced era. and how big of an influence the social world has played on either spreading awareness for social justice or using your platform to advocate and post about all that's going on in the world. For example, last June, Instagram was flooded with these black screen posts with means to protest against racial inequality and police brutality by standing with the Black Lives Matter movement following George Floyd's death. And since then, these little like informational infographics regarding other racial, cultural, social, etc. issues have become super popularized on Instagram, and this new kind of like norm has been reposting them on your personal Instagram story in hopes for your followers to like read through them and pay attention to the information that you are choosing to spread awareness of. However, one really interesting topic that I haven't heard many people talk about, but it's kind of this unspeakable like teenage secret, is that when people don't or aren't reposting or posting these informal social graphics, it's definitely noticeable by their friends or peers. And people kind of think you're either a racist or that you're ignorant and that you don't care about racial inequality. So I wanted to hear what you guys thought about this whole concept, if you've noticed it. I mean, we've had a few conversations about it, but just kind of share what that kind of looks like outside of the whole Instagram world and what you think about it.
Social media is a blessing, but it's also a curse. It was amazing to see how many people were reposting and just showing their like thoughts and opinions on everything that was happening and trying to get people like, I remember seeing these weekly posts about like what's happening in Minneapolis, like where can you show out to this weekend. So it definitely was a great way to start protests, like get the word out about what's going on. But there is also, again, as you mentioned, this sense of if you're not posting, like, are you really doing the work? Like white people kept saying white silence is violence. That was a big saying. If you were a white person and you weren't reposting, were you a racist? Were you not good at social media? So there were all these like things swarming around. And as you mentioned with the black squares, that was a big, I think, controversial thing because there were a lot of people who would just post the black square to fit in with everyone else on their feed, but not do anything else. So it's really about, I guess, what you're doing on the outside. I agree, you don't need to post everything on social media. Not all your followers need to know exactly what you're doing with your life. But if you want to work and help to make this world a better place, it's about what you do not on social media. What are you doing behind closed doors? If you're having those conversations with your family, if you're going out volunteering, getting in the community, educating yourself. So there's all these things that you can do behind social media that I think also really have an impact.
Beautifully said.
Going off of that, I think what you're getting at is the concept of performative activism, and is shown greatly through social media recently. From what I've seen, I noticed a lot of white, more specifically white people posting these little infographics or posting, like you said, the black squares, but then going to hang out with their friends, going to school and using racial slurs, and just doing the complete opposite of what they seem to be presenting themselves to be on social media. I think it's also important that you watch what you're posting and reposting, because I have seen and heard a lot of people say having to watch these videos of people of color, of the black community being killed on camera, and having people repost that, having to watch that over and over can be very traumatic and harmful. I think going back to what Sadie was saying, about how it matters what you're doing outside of what you're posting, of what you're doing just in your day-to-day life. And for those people who, if they don't want to use their social media platform to post these infographics or uplift for example, Black voices, then it matters what you're doing to make change within your family, within your friends, in your community.
Just to kind of shift the conversation back to our Jewish community, a common stereotype that I've heard is that all Jews are white. And I just wanted to state that that is not true and kind of shift our discussion more towards how we can help advocate and include all Jews, no matter their race or other cultures, to feel just as equally a part of our Jewish Minneapolis community here. So I kind of wanted to hear what you guys thought about this topic, any experiences you've had.
Being an Asian American Jew, I have kind of gone through like a lot of new experiences and like coming to terms with my identity, mostly in the Jewish community. Going to a very white camp where I would say there was maybe 3 or 4 other kids of color there. Throughout the years, I was very, I realized that I was not the same as my mostly peers around me. And throughout my time at camp, I had experience being made fun of, microaggressions, and I don't think the kids that were saying these things were doing it purposely. I think that because camp is a very white place, there was little repercussion or punishment for their actions, and so it kind of felt like a place where they didn't have these rules and felt comfortable and felt like they were able to say these things. When I was a younger camper, I did not realize that these jokes and small actions were being made very much towards me. However, once I became an older camper, it became very prominent that it was towards me. I was told things like, tell my uncle, Kim Jong-un, not to bomb the country. Told I look like Pocahontas, made fun of for my eyes, and eating pets. Really all the Asian stereotypes that you can think of. I had heard that come up a lot. And it was, I mean, my parents weren't there. I wanted to talk to someone. However, there was nobody older than me who I thought could relate to my situation, who I was comfortable going to, because it is so predominantly white. So it was really kind of, I had to go through the rest of camp being like the longest sessions. So about 2 months, and just try to navigate through that situation by myself, which was very difficult, but also has grown me a lot to deal with the more recent racism that has anti-Asian racism that has been spreading with the coronavirus.
So I have known Zoe since preschool, and we have grown up together for the past 17 years, and we have done absolutely everything together, whether it's going to synagogue together, school, soccer, you name it. We were pretty much attached at the hip. And when Zoe first told me about kind of her experiences, it was kind of after our years at camp, and she was just kind of expressing to me, oh, like, yeah, I didn't really have the same experiences as you. And I was shocked. I mean, I thought we both loved camp, loved being around these people, and it didn't even cross my mind that she had this whole different view and perspective on camp because of the racism that occurs there. It just breaks my heart to think that when she thinks of camp, she thinks of the racism she faced and how she was isolated and alone. And when I think of camp, I think of playing at the waterfront and going to Flag. And so these different experiences, it needs to be called out. There is racism in the Jewish community, and it needs to be called out and it needs to be talked about, because there are Jews of color that are in silence, that are being silenced, that are fighting this fight alone, and it needs to be called out.
Just going off a little bit of what Sadie said about calling it out, I think it's super important because my experiences being an Asian American Jew cannot relate to other people of color, cannot relate to other people of color's experiences. And so for them, it could have been a lot worse. And I know that there are many times that racial slurs or other microaggressions have been used at camp and just said normally without anyone getting in trouble for it because of how low that population of people of color is at camp.
Agreed. And something I've found crazy that we think and say to each other every single summer is, imagine if school people could see this right now. And just in this moment, right now, I'm realizing how crazy and how deep that meaning really is, because our schools are very diverse and our schools have different people with different opinions and they have different religions or different views and perspectives than us. We all grew up very similarly and have a lot of the same morals and values, but people within our outside communities do not. And to say, imagine if they could see us, what they'd think of us right now. It's crazy that so many kids that we've grown up with have different personalities when they're at camp or at home, and how you have to watch what you're saying, where you should really just be cautious of what you're saying no matter where you are. And I only met you, Zoe, and Sadie in the last few years, but I remember hearing you tell us those stories of what you've experienced at camp. I witnessed most of them and never thought twice that it was wrong or that you felt a certain way. And I just remember like carrying this guilt. I felt so horrible. I mean, I know we're all young, but even that like is an excuse to a certain extent. We were older campers and we should have realized that what our friends were saying was wrong. And no one would say that today. At least we wouldn't. But I just remember that guilt, that your innocence can only block so much. And I felt guilty for not standing up for you. And it just made me think of all the other Jews of color at camp that must face similar experiences and don't have someone to turn to. So I'm really thankful that you are vulnerable and brave enough to voice this story and bring so much truth to this, because I know all of the future Jews of color that attend camp or even just face these issues here at home will thank you and know that you can be that older person for them like you didn't have. And I'm so proud of you.
But I just want to say that I think it's very important, as from what I've seen, is the Jewish community in the Minneapolis area. I would say majority of us have the privileges that many others don't, and we need to use that to uplift people of color's voices and create this change, starting in our community and then spreading outside of it.
Historically, we know as Jews what it's like to have people not like us. We've seen synagogues be graffitied and people go in and shoot people. So we know anti-Semitism and how it feels. So why would we want to spread more hate into the world?
I 100% agree. And before we wrap up, I just wanted to mention, what would you guys recommend for anybody listening who wants to make a difference within or outside of our community but doesn't know how or where to start?
I'll start off by, when I was younger, I was talking to my grandma. She was alive during the civil rights movement. And I was asking her like her experience. She was a white female growing up during that time. And so I wanted to know like her perspective on that. And she didn't really have much to say. She grew up in suburban Minneapolis. So she didn't really know a lot. And so it made me feel kind of sad that she wasn't more involved. And so when George Floyd was murdered, there were protests that followed civil unrest, I thought to myself, I don't want my grandkids to feel the way I did. I want to be able to share with them the stories, the protests I attended, the volunteering I did, because it's the work that makes you proud to share your experiences. And I want my grandkids to grow up with the same motivation and determination for justice and equality for all.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I would just say you can start, really just start anywhere. I recently joined a club at my school called SOAR, Students Organized Against Racism. Shout out to them, what I've seen already, like they've done amazing work. And just being able to listen and learn from others' experiences is extremely important. Just getting out, volunteering, going to protest, just use your voice and your privileges to uplift others and make changes within the community. And
so actually going off what Zoe said, I also am in the SOAR group at my school, and I was disappointed in myself that I didn't join earlier because it's such an amazing group and works toward great things. They meet with the mayor and the superintendent, just people in high places. And so a big thing, this is for any place, a workplace, a college campus, a school, to find people who are willing to work to be anti-racist. And if there is no club, start one.
Of course. And just on top of what you guys were saying, I think educating yourself is so, so important, especially like we've mentioned in this social media era, using your platform to provide a safe place for other people, but also spreading awareness on important topics and having those tough discussions. I know it's intimidating and you don't want to say the wrong thing, but being in that vulnerable position and putting yourself out there shows so much about your character, and it's important to educate yourself on these important issues, no matter how uncomfortable they might seem in the beginning.
What they just told us in SOAR is like, you have to have these uncomfortable conversations. Like, that's correct. Mm-hmm. Like, you're right. Yeah. I think that was good.
I was going to add, like, another thing you can do is to just talk to those at home, research, have those conversations with your family to try and change their perspective or change your perspective. Just talking gets you so far.
Yeah.
Like we're having now.
And with that being said, I think that's all the time that we have for today. So, Sadie and Zoe, thank you both so much again for joining me this week and for sharing your insightful ideas, experiences, and opinions with everybody hearing this. And to all of you, thank you so much again for listening to this week's episode of Spill the Soup. Before we go, please make sure to show some love for the podcast by subscribing and rating 5 stars to whatever platform you're listening on and wherever else you get your podcasts. We'll see you 2 weeks from now for our next episode, so stay tuned. Spill the Soup is part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. For more information, go to tcjewfolk.com/podcast or email the show at podcast@tcjewfolk.com.